I always knew money could divide people, but I never imagined it would destroy my entire family before I was even old enough to understand what hate truly was. My name is Maya, and for as long as I can remember, I was the reminder my grandparents never wanted to see. They were old, wealthy, and proud of their pure family name, something they protected like it was sacred gold. My mother had been their shame. She fell in love with a black man, married him, and when I was born, they said she had tainted the family bloodline. My mother was cut off without a cent. I grew up watching her struggle to pay rent while my grandparents lived in a mansion paid for by old money, built on generations of arrogance. Still, my mother never said a bad word about them. She used to tell me, "Success is the only revenge worth taking." At the time, I thought she meant working hard and forgiving, but as the years passed, I realized she had buried years of pain behind her smile. I saw the letters they sent, cold, cruel, and distant. "You made your bed, now lie in it." When she got sick, I begged them for help. I wrote to them myself, telling them she was dying. I never got a reply. When she passed, I was 16. At her funeral, not one member of her family showed up. That was the day something hardened inside me. I promised myself that one day, they would remember my name, the name they refused to claim. I studied harder than anyone. I worked night shifts, took scholarships, anything to keep moving forward. I didn't have luxury or privilege, but I had purpose. Years went by, and I stayed invisible to them. I never reached out, never mentioned who I was. Until the day I graduated. College graduation felt like stepping into sunlight after years of cold. I looked at the empty seat where my mother should have been and whispered, "We made it." That night, while everyone else celebrated, I opened an email from a lawyer I'd never met before. It was short, formal, and unbelievable. My grandparents had passed away within months of each other, and somehow, I was listed in their will. The lawyer explained that my name had been added by my late uncle, their younger son, who had passed before them. I barely remembered him, but he had been the only one who didn't treat my mother like an outcast. He'd quietly left part of his share, nearly $10 million, in my name. At first, I didn't believe it. But after a week of legal verification, it was real. The estate, the properties, the stocks, it all existed. And the rest of my mother's family, the same people who left her to die, were furious. They didn't know how my name had ended up there. They called it a clerical mistake. They tried to contest the will, to erase me like they always had. But the documents were airtight. I had legal claim to everything my uncle had given me. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just inheritance. It was justice. Still, I didn't take anything right away. I stayed quiet, calm, strategic. I spent months studying their lives through social media, public records, and local news. My cousins flaunted wealth like trophies, hosting charity events about family values, while treating their employees like dirt. My grandfather's old company, one that made its fortune on exploitative labor, was now run by my uncle's son, who pretended to be a reformer. The hypocrisy was suffocating. So I made a plan. I wasn't going to just take the money and disappear. I wanted to use their empire to build something they could never control. With the help of the lawyer who had managed my uncle's estate, I began the process of transferring assets, not into my personal account, but into a trust. A trust designed to fund scholarships, housing, and community programs for underprivileged students, especially those from mixed or minority backgrounds. Every dollar that had once fueled their pride would now fuel the futures of people they looked down upon. The day the trust officially went live, I was sitting in my small apartment, sipping coffee, smiling quietly. No one knew yet. But soon the press would. I named it the Eleanor Foundation, after my mother. When the local newspaper published the story, highlighting how the new foundation was funded by a reallocated estate from a historically exclusive family, the outrage began. I watched the internet light up with their name and headlines they couldn't control. Reporters camped outside their mansion. My cousin released statements trying to distance the family from the trust, claiming it was unauthorized redistribution. They didn't know I was the one behind it, not yet. But that changed 2 weeks later, when a journalist dug into the foundation's filings and found my name. I still remember the phone call. My cousin, furious, shouting into the phone. "You've ruined everything. Do you know what you've done to our reputation?" I said nothing for a moment. Then I simply replied, "What you did to my mother was worse." And I hung up. That was the first time they heard my voice in years. The next few months were chaos for them. The media portrayed me as the estranged granddaughter who turned her inheritance into social justice. Donations poured in. The foundation grew beyond what I expected. Universities reached out to partner. The same society circles that once whispered about my mother's mistake now praised her daughter's vision. It was poetic in ways that words could never capture. But beneath the success, there was something heavier, an ache that even victory couldn't erase. I thought revenge would heal everything, but it didn't. It simply exposed the emptiness of what they'd taken from me. One night, I drove past the old estate, now partially seized for tax disputes, its windows dark and cold. For years, that house symbolized everything I hated. But looking at it now, I just felt sorry for them. All their wealth, all their pride, and not a shred of peace. My grandparents had built their world on exclusion. I had built mine on restoration. I whispered a quiet goodbye to that chapter of my life. I didn't need to burn their legacy, I had rewritten it. Months later, I received a letter from an elderly woman who used to work as a maid for my grandparents decades ago. She wrote that she had once overheard my grandmother crying late at night, saying she regretted disowning her daughter, but was too proud to admit it. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel: anger, pity, forgiveness? Maybe all of it. I realized revenge hadn't been about hurting them. It had been about reclaiming everything they said I wasn't worthy of: love, legacy, belonging. When the foundation opened its first community center, I stood in front of the building, a simple plaque with my mother's name glinting in the sunlight. Cameras flashed, speeches were made, but I barely heard them. All I could think about was my mother's voice, her laughter, her strength. She had lost everything so that I could stand here now. That was her real inheritance to me. The will to turn pain into purpose. As I walked inside, I passed portraits of the first group of scholarship students. Their faces were bright, hopeful, free. That was the true wealth. Money fades, property decays, but impact endures. I finally understood what my mother meant when she said success was the best revenge. It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about proving that love and dignity could rise from hatred and arrogance. Years later, people still write about the Eleanor Foundation. They call it a miracle, a legacy of resilience. Some even tried to paint me as a saint. But I'm not one. I'm just a woman who refused to be erased. Sometimes I still dream of that old house, the long driveway, the manicured garden, the walls that once shut my mother out. In my dreams, the gates are open and sunlight floods the halls. I didn't destroy their legacy. I redefined it. Every time a student graduates through our scholarship, every time a mother finds safe housing because of that trust, I feel like my mother's voice echoes somewhere in the universe saying, "See, baby? We did it." I guess, in the end, revenge isn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the calm satisfaction of knowing that you turned their cruelty into compassion, their greed into generosity, their hatred into healing. My grandparents left behind $10 million thinking it would secure their name forever. Instead, it secured my mother's. And as for me, I don't need their approval, their apologies, or their love. I have something far greater: the power to choose what their legacy becomes. Some might say I went too far, that I stole what wasn't mine. But the truth is, they lost the moment they chose pride over love. And I won, not because I destroyed them, but because I refused to become them. So yes, after graduating, I quietly placed my grandparents' $10 million estate into something they never would have imagined: hope. And maybe that's the kind of revenge the world needs more of. Because when hate builds empires, only love can reclaim them.